a good one? It's pretty long. Learning things about how we should take the video and not. So I'm okay. Right now. You got it. But don't worry.
Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Mariana de Leon. I'm a junior at the college studying a joint concentration between history and literature and religion. And I'm a member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side over there and the JFK street side on this side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation online with the hashtag JFK Junior Forum Live and interact with our student-run Instagram at JFK Junior Forum for behind-the-scenes highlights. Please take your seats now and join me in welcoming our guests and co-hosts, Maria Hinojosa and Julio Ricardo Varela.
Better.
Yeah, you're gonna have to.
Better.
Yeah, that's good.
No, that's great. That's great. What's up, you guys? I was just saying that this is like a little dream come true-y
Yeah,
to be here at the Institute
This
of
is
Politics.
a dream come true for me.
It's pretty
Yeah.
come true-y with some pretty powerful women right up here.
Yes.
That's us. That's us. That would be us. Wait a minute, isn't this like communities of color? We're having a discussion about communities of color.
Yes.
We're louder than this. Now,
That's what I'm saying.
I don't understand. I think, this is.
You want to try again?
Yeah.
Here we go.
I think we should try again.
Anyway, thank you for that. Because actually, you're part of the show.
Yes.
So LaTosha didn't realize that actually she was asking you to be a part of the show. She was
Okay.
giving you- because we're recording this in front of a live audience. That's you. So we need you to sound ridiculously excited, happy, like this place is bopping, popping, like there's like standing room only. I don't know why it isn't standing room only, but. So we're going to try that again, all right?
Yeah, let's
We
try
need
that
you to
again.
sound live.
You need to, right.
Yeah.
This
You
is
need
just
to
a
sound
test.
like you really like us.
Thank you. So we're gonna try it. I'll cue you, and then we'll start for real, and then it'll pick up.
Yeah.
So here's like, give us like your like serious, like we love you in 3, 2, 1.
And one more time.
So, all right.
One more
that
time.
was beautiful. You just have to sustain it.
Yeah.
You just have to sustain it.
Take
So-
whatever you're most passionate about and like 10 times over right
Yeah,
now.
because that's how
So
in
we're
the
doing
thick.
one more
That's
time.
how we do in the thick. So listen, you guys. Those of you who listen to In the Thick know that it is like Meet the Press. No, it's actually not at all. Like,
It's not Meet the Press.
It is actually, with all due respect, because I love Meet the Press, but this is politics from a POC perspective. And we do it a little bit raw, so it's a little bit uncut. So, I'm just giving you a forewarning. If there's what's the word? A swear word?
A moment.
A moment
That you might feel uncomfortable.
because of a certain word that was said, and you might just be like, but, that's just us. We're just, talking politics. And also, feel free to interact. Like, you can hoot, hollow, clap, snap. Like, but for real. Like, don't be just like,
We need an hour. You guys
Right.
you are
Like,
part of
It's
this
a
show.
church without a collection plate. If you
A
know what I
church
mean.
without a collection
Okay.
plate, says Renée Graham.
So
I like that.
that's good. That's good. You're a writer, of course.
I try.
All right.
So we have to tell you right now, this is going to become a podcast that you will hear next week. So if you don't subscribe to In the Thick, you better subscribe to In the Thick. But who subscribes to In the Thick out here right now? All right. So you guys will be on In the Thick next week. So this
So
is
for
going to
those
drop.
of you who don't know how to subscribe, please help your neighbor. Maybe they don't know how to get that. I say that with love. Not everybody knows how to subscribe to a podcast. So just help them. Just say, let me help you with your phone, and I'll show you, and then subscribe. Okay, we want that. All right, so we're going to start.
We're going to start as if this. Think of
As
this
if
as
this
an
is like the
old-time
live
radio
series,
show.
old-time
You
radio.
are part of the show, so we're going to have to cue you.
All right, we're going to stand up to get the
we're
energy
going to do
going.
this, and I will.
All right.
I'm going to. Yeah.
We're not going to dance salsa, but we could.
I was about to like break out to like Janet Jackson because I'm a little bit like into with these microphones.
Go
but
for
I'm
it,
gonna
go
I
move
have
on.
the earrings. Thank you. All right. So
Here we go.
you're going to start applauding, and you're going to keep applauding while I talk. And basically, I'll go like this. When we sit down, that means that you can kind of slow down. But other than that, you're insane out of your minds to be happy to be here. Are we cool? Are we cool?
All right, here we go.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome to In the Thick. This is a podcast about politics, race, and culture from a POC perspective. I'm Maria Hinojosa.
And I'm Julio, Ricardo, Varela, and welcome to In the Thick live in Cambridge.
All right. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, we love our live audiences
that was
right
good.
here in the very proper city of Cambridge.
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
That's right. But it's right here where we're talking politics 2020. And really, we're going to focus on voters of color and basically what they're going to do in the upcoming presidential election.
Right.
We have two amazing guests with us today. First, a big round of applause to IOP resident fellow LaTosha Brown, award-winning organizer and co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund. Hey, LaTosha! And give a warm welcome to Renée Graham. She's associate editor and columnist with the Boston Globe. Hello, Renée Graham. All right. You guys, honestly, Julio knows this.
Yes, I
To
do.
our two guests, you don't know me well enough, but oftentimes I wake up in a state of panic
You do.
these days because of the state of our democracy. And I think that's okay, because I think that, I take politics really, really personally. We are going to talk about impeachment a little bit later in the show. But we want to talk about the power of demographics, people of color, and what they're going to do. So in the 2018 midterms, just a couple of pieces of data. The POC vote was really essential. You guys, we all witnessed history. All major racial groups saw historic numbers in the turnout. The surge of Latinx and Asian voters was particularly significant, with voter turnout at 13% higher rate from 2014 midterms, according to the Pew Research Center. Black voters turned out at a 10.8% higher rate, which is essential for our democracy. You guys know, in 2020, POC voters make up a third of all of the eligible voters now. Latinx now have become the largest POC voting demographic. But, we're still historically underreported, underrepresented, underengaged, often overlooked. It still feels that way. So, LaTosha, let's talk about your just early take on how the candidates are doing in terms of reaching out to communities of color. Like, what's your the headline is...
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize.
Woo!
And hold on, hold on.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
hold
yeah.
on. Hold on.
yeah.
Get it. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on.
Yes.
I started singing that song because I think we have to really get rooted and grounded in what this is about. It's not about the candidates, really. I'm going to respond to the candidates, but I think that's part of the mistake that we made. I think we've created a space that we've made this so about the candidates that we forgot this is really about us, y'all.
Right.
This is
right.
about us.
Right.
And this is about what is the kind of democracy that we deserve, and what is the kind of democracy that we will create. And I started singing that song because I'm from a place called Selma, Alabama.
Yes.
Where before I was born, and most of us in this room, there were people that did not have resources. They did not necessarily have the perfect candidate. They didn't have government on their side, but what they had is they had a belief and a hope that they could create something different. And so sometimes I think that our political conversations are like in this space that we're constantly responding to what is instead of what could be. And this is a moment for us to really talk about and think about what is it. We're at a transitional moment. We're at this transformative moment right now. And so what I think is interesting, as if you're going back to the candidates, what I think is really interesting about the candidates is that I never thought in my lifetime that I would see Democratic candidates or any presidential candidates talk about reparations, right? I never thought that in my lifetime that I would see candidates at the top tier of their candidacy talking about the restructuring of American capitalism, right? I never thought I'm raising that because I think sometimes, you know, what we do is we fall back to what we know.
Yep.
And so we judge things as if there's not a shift. There's a shift. There's a major shift, and I don't think it's because of the candidates. I think because the people are really demanding something different.
So LaTosha, dude, your energy is like, you're just like, I love democracy.
I love people. And I think democracy, democracy, I think part of what happens in America is these concepts. Like we put concepts and these ideas of, oh, we love the Constitution. The Constitution is as good as it serves its people. America is only as good as it serves its people. What I love is I love humanity, right? And to the extent that politics will help increase the lives and advance the lives of humanity, that's what I'm passionate about.
Damn.
Right. So there you have it, right? I don't know, Renee, if you feel the same way in terms of kind of, because I think what we would all love to see is a politician who sounds a little bit more like LaTosha in the sense that, coño, man, yes! You know, I feel it, and I'm going to be engaged.
Well, you know, we'd have that, but imagine what the media reception would be about that.
That's right.
You know, oh, well, that person doesn't sound like what we're used to, and that person will immediately be discredited.
I can run for president.
Run for president. You got my vote.
But say more about that, Renee. I mean, seriously.
I mean, you know how these things work.
Yeah.
Any candidate who doesn't fit a particular mold gets marginalized. And so, you know, we have, for the first time, the most diverse group of candidates ever. And they're still having these stupid conversations. I don't know, is Kamala Harris black enough?
That's right.
Is Pete Buttigieg gay enough? What are we talking about? Democracy is under threat. And the problem with democracy in America is that it's always been fragile. It's been fragile because this nation has never lived up to the ideals of democracy. So it's very easy to drag it down, and that's the conversation we need to be having. It's about the candidates and who will best serve that, but how are we going to best serve our democracy?
So I'm going to guess that both of you guys, if we toss out the terms rural voter or swing voter
or Midwest
voter that needs to be convinced that they have to like not go down this road, that's not the question.
You sound like you read the New York Times, don't you?
But I'm just asking.
They write that story all the time, you know?
So tell me,
you know, what we've heard for the last 3 years is, what about the white people? Who speaks for the white people? Everybody speaks for the white people. The white people are not going to make this election. NBC had a statistic recently that said 1 out of every 4 votes in the Democratic primaries is going to be by an African American. 25% of the votes in the primaries will be African Americans. Who's talking about what African Americans want? Who's talking about what Latinx communities want? You know, we're not hearing anything about indigenous communities. We're not hearing anything about Asian communities. So even the way we have these conversations has to be broadened.
I agree, and I also think when you're talking about who's talking about rural America, I'm rural America. The challenge is that we've got to shift this narrative.
Exactly.
Speaking of New York Times, I actually wrote an op-ed in New York Times around rural America that specifically is talking about rural America is not all white. Right, and it's, rural America is not all conservative. If you hear the media tell it, you would think that everybody in rural America has a MAGA hat on and voted for Trump. That is not the case.
It's a code word,
and there's a code word, right? And so we've got to be able to make the distinction when we're talking about there are some folks, and particularly when you look in the South, the majority of black people live actually in the South. What is the South? Mostly rural. Now we look at there's urban centers, but I think we've got to expand this conversation around where we're not saying, when people are saying that there are challenges in rural America, that impacts all of us. That impacts many of us. Many of the black farmers that lost their land, that was rural America, right? Some of the most intense poverty that I've experienced and worked through in the Black Belt, that's rural America. Guess what? Those are black people and people of color. If you go, and I'm raising this because I think we've got to have, what also happens is it gets really distorted about who America is, right? And we use these catch-all phrases, right?
And the reason why it's a little distorted is because if most of our mainstream media that we're all consuming,
right?
And again,
it's like when Renee says the New York Times, like
then the perspective of the New York Times, which I love often. Sometimes I hate them.
You have a love-hate. You have a love-hate relationship with the New York Times. We've established that.
Okay, but then it is this perspective of white America.
Yeah, because
right.
when they say
and
rural,
therefore it's like we're going to look and see, and what I find it fascinating that when they go into rural America, it always ends up being white folks that they're talking to. When if you're in rural America, you're seeing, in fact, in the South, the area that has experienced the most intense demographic change of any part of the United States. It looks really fascinating there. I mean, in Birmingham, Alabama.
And that story's not getting told.
In Birmingham, Alabama, there's like a 4-story. It looks like this building that is there to serve the Latino community in Birmingham, Alabama. So we don't get that picture because they have a certain kind of blinders on, which is why we do this work. Right?
Which is why we need this shows and shows like this. Right, so that we can shift this other narrative. That's why I'm pushing back on to make sure that sometimes we also adopt that language and we perpetuate that same narrative. When the truth of the matter is really being, it's easy sometimes to go kind of with the code words. Even that's why I push back on how we think about this election, making this whole election about candidates. I want to share one of the races that we worked on was in Alabama. It was a Senate race with Roy Moore and Doug Jones race, right?
We know about
and so
that.
You know a little bit about that, right?
The most important Senate race. Okay.
Right, right, that one, right? That race was flipped. What was really interesting about that, there was a couple of things, but one of the things that was really interesting about it is that we didn't know Doug Jones. Now, I know everybody was like, well, Doug, we don't know that man. We didn't know him. Right, and nobody was really excited about Doug Jones, right? He had this commercial. He had a commercial that there was a Confederate general coming out, and then there was a Union general coming out, and he comes out and said, "This is what I want to be compromised." Now, y'all do know what the Great Compromise was, right? Okay, all right, and who was being compromised, and so I'm raising it that what had to happen is we had to shift the narrative of that campaign. That campaign was not about Roy Moore and just Doug Jones. When they pulled Steve Bannon out the closet and had him coming down there, right, we knew what that meant. Black women who were on the ground, we knew the messages. And so what we did is we shifted the narrative and said, this ain't about the Republicans. This ain't even about the Democrats. This is about us. And we organized in a way that we saw that seat and doing that work in that seat and supporting us moving forward. I think that's part of the problem if we don't shift on how we talk about politics.
But that's part of the issue.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You always have to look at who's shaping that narrative.
Who's shaping the narrative.
You know, that's a big part of this. So when Roy Moore was running,
right.
and there were all these polls saying, Roy Moore has got this thing and he's going to win, who were they talking to?
Right.
Who were they polling? And who was writing and assigning those stories? That's why when Doug Jones won, some people were shocked. You weren't shocked, were you?
None of us were shocked.
You weren't shocked, but
we
that's
had
the
our
whole
glass
point.
of wine already.
We
were ready.
But here's the thing. I think you guys both raise a really salient point here about black women as voters and as an electorate that quote unquote gets it in a lot of ways. So the point I'm trying to get to when you're talking about this election, like all of a sudden the media is like, oh my God, black women! Oh, did you know that they vote? Wow, that they have.
Did you know that they exist?
That they're reliable and they actually are
Loyal.
very organized and are active and engaged. Wow, we didn't know.
Well, let me tell a quick
so
story.
So tell me, like, because that's part of the misperception here.
The day after Roy Moore won, I was doing a television show, and someone else was going to be doing a different segment. And so I ran to her at the studio, and I kind of sort of knew her, but not particularly well. And she came over to me, and she wrapped her arms around me and hugged me. And I thought, okay, this is great, but I don't really know you like that. And I was just like, oh. And she's like, thank you. We're hugging all black women today. Thank you for saving us. And I said, black women weren't trying to save you. Black women are trying to save themselves. We don't vote against our best interests because nobody else has our best interests at heart. And then I told her, don't just hug black women, listen to black women, hire black women.
Invest in black women.
And then she just called me an angry black woman, and I just
I know. I actually got a phone call the day before the election. I got a phone call the day before the election from, I often share this story, from a reporter who was trying to get a heads up on a story, and he wanted a quote from me. Now, let me set the tone. In Alabama, the weekend before the election, it snowed. Now, snow is like kryptonite in this deep south, right? And so
up here. Like,
that is not like we are afraid of that stuff. We don't touch it. We stay in our houses and fry chicken and mind our own business, right? And so that weekend there was snow.
Get ready for Boston, my love. Get ready for Boston.
It's still October in Cambridge.
I've heard. I've got to gear up. But what was interesting, so there was this anticipation because all of the polls were saying that Roy Moore was going to win. And he was projected to win, right? And so I got this phone call, and it snowed the weekend before. Like, give me a break. And so I got this phone call, and the reporter said, I'm doing this story that's going to print tomorrow, and I want to know from you if you can tell me why is there going to be low? Why, if you can give an example of why do you think the turnout was so low for black voters?
Yeah.
I need you to hear me. This is the day before the election.
They're making the day
before the election.
They're already making the prediction.
The prediction was that there was going to be low black turnout. He wanted to get a head start on the story, so he wanted to get a quote from me about how the turnout was going to be low. So my answer to him was, call me on tomorrow. And so I never heard from him. Not only did black voters perform, but we overperformed because there was something that the nuances of what the media says that you don't that does not necessarily reflect what's on the ground. I have that same feeling around when I think about Biden. There's all of this position around Biden. It's not that when in the polls as Biden is doing well and he's a lead candidate, I can believe that he's leading the polls. That does not necessarily mean that he's solidified the vote. That's really what polls are, is their temperature of what is now. He has name recognition. If you ask me if it's 50 people running and you ask me who I'm going to support, I'm probably going to support the one I support that one.
You know what? That's exactly what I was just saying, is that my sense right now, look, Beto O'Rourke, when I interviewed him for Latino USA and I asked the question, why stay in the race? He did say, look, there hasn't been one vote cast. Why should I get out?
Right.
So that is an argument for democracy. But I feel like out there when I'm out and I'm interviewing every person, whether I'm at the airport or they're driving me in whatever city,
that's
town,
what she does.
anytime, that's what I do.
Maria,
right.
She talks to everybody.
Everybody. I mean, I think in general there's a kind of, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right.
There's just too many. In my community in Harlem, New York City, you guys know this. If you listen to In the Thick, you know
Maria's gym beat,
that
the
my
gym beat.
gym brothers and sisters who are all over 40, and they are going to vote for Biden. And it becomes a question of, yes, it's a very pragmatic vote. It's a pragmatic vote. We think he can win. But talk about, in terms of the next generation, and how the both of you see what's happening with this generational divide potentially within the black community, first of all, and then we can talk about Latinx voters. But
I don't know if I think it's just generationally. I'm telling you that there are conversations, there are rumblings on the ground. There are conversations on the ground right now where people are not committed. Right? If you were to take the vote right now, I do believe Biden would win. Right? But that does not necessarily mean that the person who's with Biden now could not be persuaded to not be with him a month from now. That's why I said I think it makes a difference to say who in the poll and who's committed. There are people, now Bernie folks are committed. When I see on the ground,
no, really?
Bernie folks are committed. There's very few people that I say, for whatever criticism people want to say, that folks who are with Bernie, they're with Bernie. There are people with Biden that are kind of lukewarm with Biden. I'm with Biden because they're waiting. They're like, eventually he's going to make us excited. At some point, it's gonna happen, y'all. I'm telling you, it's gonna happen.
You know what? Also, remember what the world was like in 2007 when it was Hillary Clinton.
That's right.
It was a foregone conclusion. Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee, and she was going to be the next president of the United States. And then here came Barack Obama. And everyone was kind of like, man, I don't know. I mean, it's Hillary's time, and who knows this guy? And America's not going to elect a black man. What happened?
Iowa.
You cannot predict Iowa. You cannot predict elections. You know, Elizabeth Warren declared her candidacy in December of last year. We're still not close to the primaries yet. There's so much that can still happen. And you've seen this sort of shifting in the poll. The polls right now mean nothing.
Well, plus
nobody's casting any votes.
Who are they polling?
And who are they? And that's all it's got. Who are they polling?
And who?
You know, remember what the poll said in 2016? Yeah. So. I'm not the biggest fan of polls.
At one point,
was it Rudy Giuliani?
At some point, someone was leading, and you're like, of all the people.
Well, remember last?
I think it was the Russians.
Oh my God! But my point.
Putin vote.
But here's my question about that, because the narrative tells you. It's like, oh, South Carolina, Biden's already got that locked up because he's got the black vote in South
New York
Carolina.
Times had that story.
I think the point that Renee is making, I worked in that election cycle. In 2007, if you had polled black folks, which people did, in 2007, in South Carolina, around who they were going to support, they were supporting Hillary Clinton. They were not supporting Obama. No. Then Iowa happened, and then Iowa made him seem far more attractive because at that point it was possible. Then New Hampshire happened. My point is, I think the same thing can happen. I think if we see, if we see a candidate like Elizabeth Warren literally show really well in Iowa, and New Hampshire, I think it can be a ball game changer. I really do. So I think that we're looking at the polls in context to what all we've had in the past.
So in your opinion, Renee, polling right now, don't pay attention to it.
Ignore.
POC community is engaged.
Ignore it.
But it's like, is it engaged? Is it politically engaged? Are they looking at like this differently? Are they looking at this election as like, oh, we're going to come out like we learned from the midterms?
Every single day there are 7 different polls.
Yeah.
You know, and Biden's up 3 points, and Warren's up 2, and Bernie's down 1, and Beto and Kamala Harris. I mean, what does it mean now? It doesn't mean anything.
So Renee, what do you think? Do you think that the polls have any value in at least giving us like the temperature of what's happening politically?
No.
See,
I think votes give the people the idea of what's going on politically.
Win on that.
You know, I think right. I mean, Biden has name recognition. He has national name recognition that not many other candidates have. Now, of course, I think Warren has, but I live in Massachusetts, so I think everybody knows Warren. There are lots of people who still feel like they don't know enough about Elizabeth Warren. They will find out, and when the time comes to cast their ballot, they're going to know more about these people. But right now, there's this void that I feel like the media, and I hate when I just sit here and just trash the media because I work.
No, trash the media. Let's go.
So
we work for the media. Like trash it, Renee. Come on.
But I kind of hate because the media is trying to fill this void.
Yeah.
They're trying how do we keep this kind of going in a weird way? I hate to say it. It's kind of why the impeachment news, and aside from the other reason, it's been really welcome, is actually good. It's actually news. It's actually a thing. It's not people talking about this poll and that poll and who's here. It doesn't mean anything now. Give me January, then talk to me about who's polling where. But right now, I got interested in it.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I don't throw.
Because I put all my faith in the polls in 2016.
No, I did not put all my faith in the
I
polls.
was so big because I thought America's not going to be that crazy, and I was so wrong.
No, people thought I was crazy because I was like, this man can win, and they were like, no, and I was like, no, he can
I couldn't go that deep, a darker place in myself to think he could win, and then he won. I thought, oh wow, this country is so much more racist and sexist than I realized it was, and I didn't want to go there until, I was sitting at my desk at 3 o'clock in the morning rewriting the column I had written for Hillary Clinton when I thought she was going to win.
So, in addition, the polls, I don't know, I think that there's validity in polls. I use the polls, but I use them as I would as I'm taking the temperature of a child. Just because I'm taking your temperature and your temperature is high doesn't mean the child gonna die.
Exactly.
Right? It just means that right now you might need a little medicine, right? And so I use polls as kind of like a temperature gauge. But aside from that, I do think that the element that the black brown elephant that's in the room is around voter suppression. What's really
and gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering. What's very frustrating to me is that we're on the eve of 2020, and we're not talking about that 16 million people were dropped from the voting rolls, right? Since 2016.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a major game changer. So we're talking about as if all things.
So say more. Like what?
What I was going to say is that it's very hard. This issue of voter suppression and gerrymandering, in my view, it is like the perfect storm in terms of journalists having such a problem covering it, because it's not happening in the centers like New York City or Washington, D.C., maybe in Washington, D.C., but not to these extremes. And so it feels like something very far removed, How do you write about a negative? It's very difficult. Like, the only time that you can write about voter suppression, in their view, is the day that voting is happening. Because it's very hard to write about something that hasn't happened.
But you can write about like what had happened in Georgia in 2018, where all of these polling places were being closed. But you can write that story.
Yeah, but
the problem is that story isn't sexy.
That's what I'm trying to get.
Right.
It is not considered sexy. Frankly, it's not considered.
Changing IDs people have to get right.
Is not considered.
But in
sexy.
LaTosha's view, that's the most important issue that's going to impact democracy. So what do you do, LaTosha?
I think it's the most important, and I also think that wherever there are brown and black people, I can guarantee you there's voter suppression, including in New York. And there are people who have actually been organizing around that. And I think what we have to do is we see voter suppression as the voter suppression that happens on election day. There's a spectrum of voter suppression, right? There's voter suppression that goes from when people don't have anything that prevents people from having free and fair access, open access to the ballot. That's voter suppression. I was just reading where in Minnesota, when you put in communities of color that have a particular kind of relationship with law enforcement, when you put a precinct as a voting place, that's voter suppression. That happens in New York. That happens in Washington, D.C. That happens in places all around the country. We don't see it as such, but it is. And I think that's why we've got to have an honest conversation around what are those elements. Some of them are above the surface where we can see. Some of them are very different and nuanced, like putting where you put voting precincts. What precincts are open, what are closed, how do you do exact match, like in Georgia, where if you don't write your name the same exact way, how are the rolls cleared, how does the Secretary of State update the voting rolls? We're seeing that across the country. The problem is that the narrative says that's something that happened in Georgia.
Correct.
Right. The narrative does not really speak to, there's been 33 million people who have been dropped, mostly people of color, that have been dropped from the voting rolls since 2014.
Well, look,
right? 33, wait, hold on.
33 million people.
Okay, hold up a second. That's a huge number.
That's a huge number.
33 million.
Since 2014.
Have you seen that?
Have you seen that headline?
No.
Okay, why?
That's a headline.
That's a headline.
That is a huge headline. Yeah. Why have we not seen? I mean, it goes to.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons, and Renée, but I think this whole notion of it's distant and it's happening. What do you think, Renée?
I think there's always this sense that somehow the South is doing some kind of dirty dealing that isn't happening elsewhere.
There you go.
And for the most part, the media covers.
That's right.
The big centers. They cover D.C., they cover New York, they cover L.A. Now, I could say from personal knowledge that when Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts, ran, who was going to be the first black governor of Massachusetts, all of a sudden, polling machines in Dorchester and Roxbury weren't working.
Which were predominantly black neighborhoods.
Which
for
are
people that
largely
the
people
people
of
that
color.
are outside of Massachusetts.
And so suddenly you had long lines and people who were getting frustrated and then leaving because they had to go to work or they had to pick up their kids or they had to do something else. So suddenly that becomes a way of voter suppression.
Yeah.
Let's make it impossible for you to vote. And that can happen in New York and Chicago and Boston and DC
so
and
I'm
all
just
these
gonna
things
tell
where we
you-
think
okay,
that
so
doesn't occur.
Thank you for clearing that up, because
Yeah.
now I'm thinking back to my experience in voting in the midterms in Harlem on 114th Street at, I think it was Wadley High School. It was a zoo. So it took us an hour to vote, hour and a half. People were, it was crazy, because it's like, come on, are you kidding? So you are right, because if you cannot make that line, because you've got to go to work or you've got to go do, it's another way in which that voter is gone.
Right.
That voter is gone.
So if the polls open at 7 o'clock and you've got to be to work by, say, 8:30, and it's an hour-long wait, what are you going to do?
Exactly.
Or multiple
It's
hours.
right.
Or multiple hours.
Right. And you know how many people are registered in that polling site. Why don't you have enough machines? Why are there not enough machines in Harlem? And there's enough machines in Upper Manhattan? Right? They're not waiting for 3 or 4 hours. So we have to really look at how nuanced this is, in a way that when we're seeing voter suppression, that how widespread and insidious it is. And because we don't see it as such, on some ways we accept it. We accept that as normal. We accept that there are Native American communities out in the Midwest that they can't use their post office address, even though that's the address that they've been able to use. That's voter suppression.
Exactly.
And so we've got to have a conversation that's deeper than this sensationalized headline of look what happened in Georgia. That happens in America every single day. I can guarantee you, where there are brown and black people in America, there is a story there about voter suppression.
But we also have to have that conversation in addition to, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go. Yeah,
Don't hold back.
that was good.
But we also have to have that
I
conversation.
love the energy around this
Right.
conversation, because
Because
it's like
it's important.
we need the headline, right? Go
Right.
ahead.
We also have to talk about voter suppression. We love to talk about foreign interference.
That's right.
What's Russia doing? What's China doing? And there's a wonderful book called One Person, No Vote, written by Carol Anderson. And in that book, she says, Republicans hacked our elections long before the Russians ever got to them. And that's an important point. It's easy to kind of look over there and say, oh my God, what is Putin doing? Or what are the oligarchs doing? What's happening right here? How is a fundamental American right being robbed from millions of people in plain sight? This isn't happening when it's happening in plain sight, because when you're changing IDs that people need to vote, the fact that you even need an ID to vote, you shouldn't even need an ID to vote.
Correct.
People assume, look, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Massachusetts, I've lived in Florida. I have never needed my ID, and I still have it in my pocket, just in case anybody pulls some BS with me when I get ready to vote.
I want to be there. I want to be there if they pull the BS.
I'm so ready.
I'll be like, go, Renee, go. In the back, you got a problem with my friend over here?
That's right.
But I shouldn't have to be.
Exactly. I'm not.
You know?
I know.
I shouldn't have to. I've never had to use my ID, but that's the problem. No one is paying attention to this happening.
Right.
It happened in 2008.
That's right.
It's happened really since 1865.
Yeah.
If you want to go back to it.
No, if you want to be technical, we can go back to what was called Reconstruction.
Right.
And so I think we've got to understand how systemically, like how structural racism, it's almost like in America, racism is so normal that we can't even envision America without racism, right?
And sadly, when the conversation is let's try and envision it, sadly some people take it as an affront to them.
Right.
Yes.
And it's like, no. This is not an affront. This is a conversation that we're having about our country and democracy.
and also now when you see sort of, in a post-El Paso world, that you see the Latinx community sort of waking up to, hate crimes and seeing what they're going to do politically in the next election cycle. But those stories are happening as well. And this sort of like the fact that people don't think that, if you're Latinx in America, what do you mean? You're voting like you're coming in with 20 votes because there's literal lies being told by people that says, come on in and vote Democratic. So it's that also part. It's all connected here. It's all this notion that people of color are lazy or not politically engaged or don't have the rights. And we're seeing it in the Latinx community now. So what do you do? What do you do in the next year? Because there's also this notion of invisibility. Because I'll give you a perfect example. 2016, I was right. Oh, Latino vote. Yeah, Trump, everyone's coming out. Yeah, we're coming out in record numbers, which we did. But Trump won. And I would get calls from like white male journalists to be like, hey, I thought that Latino vote was coming out. It didn't happen. And what I've seen is sort of this invisibility about this issue in the political sphere, where it's almost like what Maria says. It's like, you take one step forward and 2 steps back.
It's one step forward, 67,000.
Yeah, it feels that. So how do you deal with invisibility in this election cycle? Because I think we're all feeling it.
I think you also have to remember the conversation that's being had is often about obscuring the conversation that's not being had. So if we're talking about, hey, where were all the Latino voters?
Yes.
We're not talking about how 52% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And what did that mean? And what did that say about America? And what did that say about white supremacy versus gender? We don't have that conversation.
Yeah.
Something I'm really curious about, and since El Paso, obviously we're talking about the mass shooting at the Walmart in El Paso, is how that has energized certain communities. Because here you had Donald Trump ramping this up over and over again. You get a manifesto from the shooter, essentially echoing Trump's words.
Hispanic invasion.
Right. His words cost people their lives.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that has to have an impact in this election. You can't ignore a population that feels literally under threat by the President of the United States.
So I went to El Paso 2 days after it happened. We got there on Monday night. So on Monday night at the vigil, which was basically a vigil overlooking the parking lot that was overlooking the Walmart. And it was very solemn. This was a huge tragedy for community. No one expects this ever to happen.
Right.
Very solemn. And we happened to encounter a woman who worked in that Walmart who had friends who were working that day. And the most surprising thing that happened was I did not ask her a political question because it was a state of mourning. And she was the first of 3 people who brought up a connection as being kind of a Latina in El Paso, and then saying, I've been thinking a lot about the people of Puerto Rico.
Oh, with the resignation and the
I've been
governor.
thinking a lot about what they were
thinking
thinking was the image of Donald Trump arriving and throwing the paper towels, and the notion that this is a people that had been disrespected over and over and over by this particular president, and then making this connection from El Paso to Puerto Rico was not one that I was expecting. I do think, my sense was, and of course this was a moment of trauma, that Texas is not going to be the same in terms of the politics. That the big problem with Texas is what we've been talking about. It really is voter suppression, and it is people who just don't vote, who just stopped voting, who just gave up, it's not red or blue, it's a non-voting state. But I think, sadly, this is something which is going to engage the Latinx community, which is the question to you guys. So let's talk for a moment before we open it up to the audience about just some thoughts about Latinx voters, about Asian voters.
And the invisibility question, that it feels like, this is changing, the numbers are there, but I don't feel like we are part of this conversation. Or at least it's what you started at the beginning. It's like this striving to be recognized. And I don't think we're ever going to get there. We have to just create our own
So I think
places.
that's where we are. I think I think we want to see whose conversation do we want to be in? Are we still striving to be in someone else's conversation, or can we create a new conversation?
I think we just created a new conversation right
now. We just did it right here in
Cambridge. Right? And I say that because I think that part of what happens is we keep responding to the same thing that is. We know that, right? How can we create the kind of stimulation for people to think what can be? And I think part of what happens, my work, even what pushes my work, is really having people spend more time in the hope space and to really think about, like for voting, I do voting work. I've been doing voter registration and voting work my entire adult life, right? But let me say, I don't think that our liberation is going to come from voting. And I do voting work, right? I see voting as harm reduction. That the best that we can get out of voting is actually putting people in place and position that to help reduce the harm. What is going to happen to
It's like
really
triage,
shift?
like stop
Right? It's
the bleeding.
Just stop the bleeding, right?
Yeah.
But if we want something different, that's requiring something different from us, right? Sometimes we also get caught up in, if I could just vote and then everything's going to be fixed, right? We can't believe that lie either, right? And we're complicit. And so what we've got to do is, I always push, even in my study group here, I push, we need some radical, revolutionary reimagining of what America could become and not be afraid of that. That ultimately what people are hungry for, they are tired of the politics. They're tired of, we can talk about the Republicans and Democrats, but as many people, if you look at both, Obama did not come out of the Democratic Party apparatus. Neither did Trump. And the truth of the matter is, one of the things that people would probably argue with me about this is I have a theory that both of them were actually elected for the same reason in some ways, right? Both, their base wanted to see something different, right? And so while there were some nuances behind it, I don't think that they're the same exact piece. While there's some nuances behind it, for whatever reason, neither one of them came out of the party structure or with the party people. And so what I think is really important for us to really have a different conversation about democracy. One, do we really fundamentally believe in democracy? I'm not convinced that people really fundamentally believe in democracy. Do I think that the other person should have free and fair access to the ballot if they are Republican, or if they're a Democrat, or if they are rural white America, or if they are from the Latinx community? Do we fundamentally believe in democracy? Secondly, if we so believe in democracy, right, and we believe in the idealism, there's an idealism around democracy, how are we going to make that practical? And what are we willing to give up to make that practical? So I just think that we need to have a different, radical rethinking around where we are in this country and how we can take this moment where the fragility of democracy has been exposed, right?
And the white fragility of democracy.
White fragility of democracy has been exposed.
And democracy has always been fragile.
Right, the holes in the Constitution, as it relates, part of what Trump is getting away with is because part of this idea of presidential powers is also based on the person in that office will respect the customs, right? And so the holes in the Constitution, the holes in, what is it that we need to take things to the next level? Because I often say, you're not going to convince me that people 300 years ago thought about every thought that could be thought about democracy. I think there's a little something we can add.
And lest we forget that democracy was incomplete anyway. Because it didn't include everyone.
Anyway.
You know what I'm?
And it still
was just
doesn't.
very interesting because I was interviewed just before we started about why we should remain committed to this work. And for me, democracy, because I had to raise my right hand to become a citizen in this country.
Like you still have that.
It's democracy is not just, it is about the voting, but it's not just about that. It is actually about this.
This right
here. It is about having the engagement. Tell me how so who are you going to vote for? Who are you thinking about? That's what it is. All right, you guys.
All right.
We're going to open it up to questions from the audience.
So I have a couple of, before we turn it off, first of all, let's give a round of applause to these. All right, so we're going to take questions from the audience. Couple of things. Please identify yourselves.
We have 2 mics.
We have 2 mics. Ask one brief question. And if there are any aspiring politicians here, no speeches, please. Questions should end with a question mark. So anyway,
well, if you're a politician and you can give your speech in
like 10 seconds, I'm good.
Hey.
So why don't you, whoever's up on the mic, identify yourself and let us know what your question is.
Yeah, hi, my name's Luke. I'm a sophomore at the college. So the first 2 states in the primary, Iowa and New Hampshire, which have an incredible amount of influence not only on the momentum, but the outcome of the election, as you guys have kind of discussed earlier, are disproportionately white compared to the rest of the country. So on this idea of envisioning a better democracy, I'm just curious would you change the primary schedule and process, and how would you do it?
I would, but I also expect white people to re-envision as well. I think part of the challenge is that we need the placement of whether it's Iowa or New Hampshire, or I think that's one piece structurally, right? But as it relates to when I was talking about the reimagining, I need all of us to spend time reimagining so that if it is an Iowa or if it's an Iowa first, it becomes almost irrelevant because there's a certain different kind of level of thinking. So that's my future dream, right? On the practical answer to where we are now, I do think that when we're looking at places, it's really interesting because Iowa is a really interesting place. And the electorates of Iowa are very distinctively different. Now, if you said, it depends on when you change it, because if you say Alabama's going to be first, I'm like, y'all, it's going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. And I'm from Alabama, right? And so I think that I don't know if I'm so attached to the placement as the structural placement of it, and I think I'm having a hard time with it because I think that's part of the problem. I think that oftentimes we think we can do these anecdotal pieces and that will fix it, when fundamentally I don't think that's a structural problem. That I think the problem is much greater and much more structural around how we think about democracy, if in fact we support democracy. That's a real question. We take for granted, because it's American exceptionalism, that all of us are democratic. I believe most folks don't really fundamentally believe in democracy, right? They like the idealism around democracy, but the practical piece that the people that I don't like have as much right in the decision as I do. Where do they do that at?
Hell no.
They like democracy for themselves, but not for you.
But not for you.
You know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm all for democracy, but wait, that guy's going to have the same rights as me? Nah, I'm not feeling that so much. You know.
The point is, I think that there is a real, look, I'm about to reveal something that I haven't said, which is like, well,
This is good.
I don't know if it's that good.
Q&A time with Maria Hinojosa.
I worry about we all worry about the integrity of our voting. So I'm like, I don't know, I'm not here doing any deep study about this, but paper ballots, maybe?
You want paper? She wants paper ballots. You've told me this.
I do, because I don't understand. I'm very concerned about how our votes get counted in, and just the systems that we use. So I'm all about challenging the structure and questioning it.
I actually like something about the Iowa. I just want to lift up the Iowa caucus model.
I love it.
The caucus
I actually
model.
like that model.
I think it's beautiful.
And so I think there's fundamentally something that America could learn from that process, right?
Let's all caucus.
That really is about people caucusing and making decisions collectively. I know that the demographics are very different, but my point is, I think we've got to really look at what are some of the structural issues that would actually encourage democracy and encourage participation.
But I also think the big question is, when you think about primaries, and it's a good question, remember it's not a public, like, those are owned by political parties that already have inherent interests in setting up certain outcomes. And I don't think, it's not only democracy, it's like political parties. Once you have power, it's very hard to get rid, they're not going to give you power. Here's the power. Here's the power we had for.
I will say that the fastest growing demographic in Iowa
is
Latinx.
There you go.
All right.
So identify yourself and your question.
Hi, my name is Maria Barsayo Lynch. I'm a former student and run the Defending Digital Democracy project here at the school's Belfer Center. And just because of what Maria said, Julio, I will mention that the project looks to focus on helping people in democratic processes, like election officials, work to create solutions to cyber and information attacks.
Nice.
So my question, though, for you all in your work and what you're doing, one, in this digital realm, what are the positives that you're seeing about how the digital space helps you connect with communities of color around voting? And then on the opposite side of that, to speak to what you were just saying, Maria, with what we're seeing and learning about mis and disinformation, what we call information operations or influence operations, and seeing real examples of disinformation spreading about polling locations, et cetera. How are you seeing that communities of color may be targeted with those types of systemic attacks?
That's a great question. Oh my God, that's an in the thick right there. But
we absolutely saw that in 2016.
Yep.
And what was really frustrating to me about 2016 was that a lot of these sort of Russian bots and these sort of bot farms that were putting out misinformation we're exploiting American racism to do it.
Correct.
So because America has not corrected its problem with racism, it's now being used against us by other countries. So then they were sort of saying to black people, well, this is going to happen. You have to vote on this day, and if you don't do this, this is going to happen this way. And this is on Facebook. And they would have these Black Lives Matter pages on Facebook that were being run by like a Russian guy.
And they were saying don't vote.
And they were saying don't vote because if you go to this polling place, this is going to happen. It's a set of. So all of these things were happening, but what got to me is because America did not solve its own problems, it's coming back to haunt us.
Which is
and that's
why
going to continually happen. Social media, I think, plays a big role in a lot of this, good and bad. There are ways that social media can reach out to people to give them good information, but you have to be really discerning about what you're reading. And you have to double check. It can't just be, oh my God, I saw this, I have to retweet this or I like this. No, check it out what it says. Make sure you got the information correct, because there's always been disinformation out there, but it spreads so much quicker now and so much more widely than it used to.
But a positive of digital community is like I don't think we could ever survive as PLC without digital.
Right.
Because we've been able to create a new wave to kind of combat these narratives.
Right. I mean, in the thick in and of itself survives, and it's a digital experience.
Exactly.
And it was not before.
But you have to be smart about it.
You got to be smart about it. No, I agree with you, but it's...
Like a friend of mine today wanted me to join it was a Slack group for journalists of color. And she gave me the password. I'm like, are we sure white supremacists aren't running this? And she's like,
the fact that you asked that question.
Right? I wasn't even sure, because I thought, well, what if this is some sort of weird thing to target us?
It's a big critical thing. Give a check mark for Renée Graham.
So I'm just like, did you give them this information? You have to really ask.
Maria's like, Maria's going to ask that question to me every time now. She's like,
I'm sorry. We have to be. We have to be smart about this. And we have to be careful.
That's a good point.
And we have to realize what we're dealing with right now. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kiana. I'm a sophomore at the college. This question is directed more towards Maria and Julio, but open to all. As Hispanic Heritage Month is coming to its end, I was wondering if you could say a few words about what you think what you think is most important for us to keep in mind going forward, even as this important month of acknowledgement comes to its close.
Wow. I mean, no, that's really deep, because I think what we have to understand is that we have to own our power. And owning our power, as LaTosha is saying, it's not just about going and voting, but that's an essential part. I'm so worried about the long-term impact of this campaign, basically anti-Latinx, anti-immigrant. We internalize so much of it. So I'm deeply worried about those lasting wounds. But I gotta say, most of the time I'm feeling pretty optimistic about Latinx voters. What happened in the midterms just now in terms of Latino participation was pretty extraordinary. I'm still hoping that we show up in 2020. But I think all of us have to be having this very real conversation about feeling attacked, loved, survival, how we have to protect ourselves, take care of ourselves, build coalitions, see ourselves in the people most unlike us. And for Latinos and Latinas, I also think each one of us has the responsibility to be talking politics with our family, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And merienda, and snacks.
And merienda, and
café.
But not like, but like, that is actually our extraordinary responsibility to make sure that our young people are engaged.
Yeah, you know what I always say about Hispanic Heritage Month? Every day is Hispanic Heritage Month at Futuro Media. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, it's a great month, it's great, but we're not checklist items, and we have to every day we have to be talking about this, and it's not it's this question of invisibility is so huge for us. So we have one more question here, and just to wrap it up.
My name's Kevin O'Reilly. I'm an advocate with US PIRG. I had a question for LaTosha. I love what you had to say about changing the conversation, not making it about the candidate, the Republican, the Democrat, but making it about the people. What stories were you telling in Alabama that enabled you to do that?
Wow, great question.
We talked about it. There were a couple of things. In Alabama, we talked about, particularly in the Black Belt region, we talked about not having access to resources. A very, very poor community. And the two things that people cared most about in our community was criminal justice reform and healthcare. And part of it is because they didn't expand healthcare. And so we would talk to people about we need someone in office that is at least an ally around those two things, that around healthcare and criminal justice reform. And so we made our conversation be around the issues that we cared about, right? And we would be honest with folks. We would say, we don't expect this person, we're not looking for a savior in this space, right? Because we know that just inherently within this system that there's limitations, right? But I would rather have an ally in that position than someone who is adamantly saying that they don't support those two positions. And so in that, and we also, the day after Doug Jones got elected, there was in the newspapers across Alabama, there was an op-ed that 23 organizations, we had already organized 23 organizations to write an op-ed. It was like, just in case you think about not doing right, right? We want to let you know that today
you won, but.
Right. And so
here we go.
And I think that's what we got to see. We've got to see the shaping of, as long as we're putting our fate in someone else's hands, like that is the end all and the be all. Like, let's be honest. If we really believe that government is other people, for the people, by the people, when are we going to make it be so? Because right now we're not. Right now we're operating as if government is something outside of itself. You know, I know I'm in the JFK Center, and I'm just very respectful of this process. And I know that there's this piece, we know that this famous quote around not ask what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? I'm like, no, what can my country do for me? I pay taxes, I work, I need to know what can my country do for me? And I don't think that that's the wrong question. I think that's precisely the question we should be asking.
Wow.
I just wanted to add something quickly, and I'm sort of stealing a line from Rachel Rollins, who is the Suffolk County DA. I don't want allies. We need accomplices.
Damn.
Allies are great.
I don't know if I don't want allies.
No,
want
I want people in the trenches. I don't want the person who says to me on the side, "I'm with you."
Got you.
I want you in the trench with me.
Got you.
Yeah.
No more allies. Let's do accomplices in 2020.
I actually think that's really profound, you guys.
Yeah.
I think that at this point, that notion of ally and accomplice sounds like a very weighted term, but that's what we're
What
talking
about squad?
about.
Can we go with squad?
Oh, we can squad up.
Okay. All right.
That's a bit of a conversation, right?
And that's a wrap.
We're in the thick. Let's go.
Thank you to our live audience for making it going here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We want to give a special thanks to those who helped plan this show. Marisabel Jaramillo, Harris. A shout out to the team that made us sound good today. Trevor Carmick, Kathy Park, their media services team. Our freelance engineer, Kevin O'Connell from the PRX Podcast Garage.
Keep it going.
Our thanks to IOP resident fellow LaTosha Brown, award-winning organizer with an amazing voice, co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund. Also, Renée Graham, associate editor, columnist with the Boston Globe. Thank you so much for joining Julio and me on this edition of In the Thick. I'm Maria Hinojosa.
And I'm Julio Ricardo. Thank you,
I have to give you my car before we go. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
You ain't had a winter yet, huh?
I already heard.
Nicely done.
Fabulous.
Nicely done, everyone. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
I know.
It's always like this here, right?
Great.
I know. This is what